The ice particles struck Alista's face like tiny daggers, each one leaving a stinging sensation on her blue-tinged skin. The howling winds of Veridan's notorious polar storms carried the sound of her daughter's whimpers away almost as soon as they left the child's mouth. Clutching Tavi closer to her chest, Alista trudged forward through the knee-deep snow, her three-fingered hand pulling the tattered thermal wrap tighter around them both. "Just a little further, my starlight," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. "Someone will help us, they must." Helix Prime rose before them, a towering metropolis of gleaming crystalline spires and pulsing light networks, home to the wealthiest Veridani citizens. For refugees from the outer colonies like Alista, the city represented their last hope after the consortium wars had reduced their home to radioactive wasteland. Tavi shivered violently against her mother's chest, her small, six-limbed body dangerously cold. The child's normally vibrant gill slits along her neck had turned a sickly gray, a warning sign that Alista couldn't ignore. 3 days without proper nutrition and shelter had pushed them both to their limits. The first residence she approached belonged to a prominent merchant family. The security field hummed as she pressed her palm against the visitor panel, leaving a smudge of frost mixed with the purple fluid that served as Veridani blood. "Please," she called out when the communication screen flickered to life. "My daughter needs warmth and food. We can work clean, maintain your home systems, anything." The screen went dark without a word. Door after door, the pattern repeated itself. Some residents barely glanced at her before refusing entry. Others expressed disgust at her appearance. Her once proud cranial ridges now cracked and peeling from exposure, her ceremonial clan markings faded to near invisibility. "War refugees bring trouble," one citizen hissed through a barely opened entrance portal. "The consortium might track you here. Go to the processing centers like the others." "The centers are overflowing," Alista tried to explain. "They're turning people away. My daughter will die if—" The portal sealed shut with a hiss of compressed air. At the 12th residence, an elderly Veridani actually stepped outside, scanning Alista and Tavi with an analyzer. "Disease carriers," he muttered, though the scanner showed no such thing. "Probably radiation poisoning from the outer colonies. Can't risk contamination." The 13th door belonged to a young family. Alista saw small children peering curiously from behind their mother's ceremonial robes before being hurried away from the sight of the desperate refugees. By the 16th rejection, Alista could barely stand. Her legs trembled uncontrollably, and Tavi had grown frighteningly still, her eyes half closed. The storm had intensified, turning the world into a swirling white void that seemed determined to erase them both. The 17th door belonged to a government official. Alista recognized the insignia etched into the entrance portal. Hope flickered briefly. Surely a public servant would understand their obligation to help citizens in need. "Please return during official assistance hours," came the automated response. "The commissioner is not receiving unscheduled visitors." "My child is dying," Alista screamed, pounding on the unyielding door with what little strength remained in her body. "She's a citizen of Veridan. Your oath demands you help her." Silence answered her. The security field intensified, sending a painful shock through her hand that made her stumble backward into the deepening snow. Alista wept then, her tears freezing on her face as she cradled Tavi. She had nowhere left to go. The city center was kilometers behind them now, and they had drifted toward the outskirts, the border zone where the gleaming metropolis gave way to maintenance facilities, and beyond that, the vast frozen wastelands. Through the blinding snow, she spotted a small structure, different from the elegant Veridani architecture. Blockier, more utilitarian, with warm yellow light spilling from windows designed for different proportions than Veridani physiology. The Terran outpost. She had forgotten the humans had established a diplomatic presence on Veridan 3 cycles ago. With nothing left to lose, Alista used her last reserves of strength to carry Tavi toward this final possibility. Unlike the ornate Veridani dwellings, the human structure had a simple mechanical door with a basic chime. Her trembling finger pressed it, expecting nothing. The door slid open almost immediately. Standing there was a human male, smaller than a Veridani but solidly built. His skin was a rich brown, his eyes widening as he took in the sight before him. Help was all Alista could manage before her legs gave way. Instead of closing the door, the human lunged forward, catching her and Tavi before they hit the ground. Without a word, he pulled them inside, away from the biting cold and howling wind. "I've got you," he said in accented but clear Veridani. "You're safe now." He wrapped a thermal blanket around them both and immediately placed a steaming cup in Alista's hands. For Tavi, he produced a nutrient pack calibrated for Veridani children, something he had no reason to keep on hand, but somehow did. "Why?" Alista whispered, as the human carefully monitored Tavi's vitals with a medical scanner. "Why would you help when 17 of my own people turned us away?" The human, whose identification patch read Jamal Reeves, Earth Diplomatic Corps, looked up with an expression Alista couldn't quite interpret with her limited knowledge of human facial cues. "Because," he said simply, "no one deserves to be left out in the cold." As Tavi began to stir, color returning to her gill slits, Alista felt something beyond the physical warmth spreading through her body. For the first time since fleeing her destroyed colony, she felt something she had almost forgotten existed. Hope. 3 days after their arrival at the outpost, Alista woke to the sound of her daughter's laughter, a sound she hadn't heard in months. Following it, she found Tavi and Jamal seated at the small kitchen unit, the human teaching the Veridani child how to fold small animals from pieces of paper. "It's called origami," Jamal explained when he noticed Alista watching them. "An ancient earth art form. Your daughter has exceptional dexterity with her secondary limbs. She's already mastered the crane." Tavi proudly held up a delicate paper creation. "Look, Mother, it's a flying creature from Earth." The transformation in her daughter was remarkable. Tavi's gill slits now pulsed with healthy color, and her eyes had regained their characteristic amber luminescence. The nutrient supplements Jamal had provided were working, supplements he had no obligation to stock, but had done so anyway. "You should rest more," Jamal said to Alista, concern evident in his expression. "Your core temperature is still fluctuating. Veridani physiology takes longer to recover from hypothermia than humans do." "How do you know so much about us?" Alista asked, accepting the steaming cup of herbal liquid he offered, a Veridani healing tea that he had somehow procured. Jamal's smile revealed straight white teeth, so different from the serrated edges of Veridani mouths. "I requested this posting specifically, studied your biology, culture, everything I could before coming. Most humans choose the central worlds for diplomatic work, but I wanted something different." As Tavi returned to her paper folding, Alista studied their savior. Jamal moved with an economy of motion that suggested military training before his diplomatic career. His quarters were sparse, but thoughtfully arranged, environmental controls set to accommodate Veridani comfort rather than human preference. "Why did you help us?" she asked again, the question that had haunted her since their arrival. "Your diplomatic status doesn't require you to shelter refugees." Jamal was quiet for a moment, adjusting the temperature control before answering. "My grandmother was a refugee. Earth had its own wars before we reached the stars. She told me stories of doors closing, of carrying my mother as an infant through hostile territory." His eyes met hers. "Some things transcend species." Later that evening, after Tavi had fallen asleep in the small room Jamal had prepared for them, Alista finally shared her story. The words poured out like the toxic rains that had fallen on her colony after the consortium bombing, unstoppable and devastating. "We were agriculturists on Veridon's fourth moon. When the war reached us, there was no warning. My bondmate Naren died defending the evacuation shuttles." Her voice cracked. 3,000 colonists, only 800 made it off-world." Jamal listened without interruption, his brown eyes focused intently on her face. When she described the refugee processing centers, overcrowded, undersupplied with priority given to those with valuable skills or political connections, his jaw tightened. "They classified me as unskilled labor," she said bitterly. 20 years of botanical engineering reduced to nothing because my credentials were destroyed with our colony's central database." "That's why you were out in the storm," Jamal concluded. "They wouldn't process you." Alista nodded. Tavi was getting sicker each day. The centers are designed to process refugees, not care for them. I thought surely someone in the capital would help their own kind. "Bureaucracy and fear make people forget their humanity, or whatever the Veridani equivalent is," Jamal said softly. He reached across the table hesitantly, then withdrew his hand, unsure if the gesture would translate across species. Alista surprised herself by reaching out and taking his hand. The 5 fingers felt strange against her 3, but the warmth was universal. "Thank you," she whispered. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor, a security official from the Helix Prime Central Authority. Jamal met them at the door while Alista and Tavi remained hidden in the back room. "Diplomatic Liaison Reeves," the official began formally, "we've received reports of unauthorized refugees at this outpost. You understand harboring unprocessed colonists violates." "No one here is unauthorized," Jamal interrupted, his voice calm but firm. He produced a tablet displaying official-looking documentation. "I've registered these individuals under Earth Embassy Protection Codes. Section 7A, they're now classified as cultural consultants to the Terran diplomatic mission." The official's cranial ridges flattened in surprise. "That's a creative interpretation of diplomatic privilege." "Feel free to contest it through official channels," Jamal replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm sure Earth Central would be fascinated by Veridan's treatment of war refugees, especially those with children." After the official departed, Alista emerged from hiding, trembling. "You risked your position for us." Jamal shrugged. "Diplomatic immunity has its advantages." He hesitated before adding, "I meant what I said. I could use a cultural consultant, especially one with botanical engineering experience. The hydroponics lab here is struggling with Veridani plant species." As he showed her the small laboratory attached to the outpost, their hands brushed again. This time, neither pulled away. Standing among the struggling alien plants that needed care just as she did, Alista felt a sensation she couldn't immediately identify. It was only later, watching Jamal teach Tavi another Earth game involving colored cards, that she recognized it. Beyond gratitude, beyond respect, something fragile and unexpected was growing. Something she had believed died with her bondmate on their burning colony. The first tender shoots of attraction, taking root in the most unlikely of soils. Weeks passed, marked by the gradual retreat of Veridan's relentless winter. The hydroponic garden flourished under Alista's care, alien plants responding to her touch as if recognizing a kindred spirit. For the first time since arriving on this cold world, Jamal's outpost felt like more than a diplomatic assignment. It felt alive. "Your mother has remarkable hands," Jamal told Tavi as they observed Alista coaxing a particularly stubborn Terran tomato plant to intertwine with a native Veridani vine. The hybrid cultivation was Alista's idea, an experiment in cross-species symbiosis that shouldn't have worked but somehow did. "On our colony, she was called the Green Touch," Tavi said proudly, her secondary limbs carefully mimicking her mother's pruning technique. "Father used to say she could convince rocks to grow leaves." The casual mention of Naren no longer brought immediate tears to Alista's eyes. Grief remained, but it had transformed into something she could carry without being crushed beneath its weight. She looked up to find Jamal watching her, his expression softening when their eyes met. These unguarded moments between them were becoming more frequent, brief connections that lingered longer each time. That evening, as a rare break in the weather revealed Veridan's twin moons hanging like pale eyes in the darkening sky, they stood together on the outpost's small observation deck. "The residence permit application is ready," Jamal said, handing her a tablet. "I've included your complete botanical credentials based on your descriptions. The diplomatic endorsement should override their usual verification requirements." Alista studied the document, then looked up in surprise. "This lists us for permanent residency in the Western District. That's one of the most exclusive zones in Helix Prime." Jamal's smile held mischief. "Diplomatic housing allocations. Another creative interpretation of my privileges. The apartment there has been sitting empty for 3 years, meant for an Earth ambassador who never arrived after relations cooled." Their fingers brushed as she returned the tablet, the contact sending a now familiar warmth through her arm. Neither acknowledged it, but neither moved away. "Why are you doing all this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jamal leaned against the railing, his profile outlined against the moons. "At first it was simple, you needed help. Anyone with basic decency would have done the same." He turned to face her. "But now—" The silence between them pulsed with unspoken possibilities. "Now," Alista prompted, her heart accelerating to match the rapid rhythm of her secondary pulmonary system. "Now I find myself looking forward to each morning because you'll be there." he admitted. Watching you bring life back to plants that were dying under my care, hearing Tavi laugh. I've been alone at this outpost for almost a standard year, sending reports that no one reads about a culture that fascinated me but remained at a distance. His gaze was intense. You and Tavi made this place feel like home. Illista's cranial ridges flushed with the deep purple of emotional arousal, a physiological response she couldn't hide. We are different species, she said softly, not as rejection but as acknowledgement of the complexity before them. Yes, Jamal agreed, reaching out slowly to trace the pattern of her cranial ridges with gentle fingers. Different in ways that matter and ways that don't. The touch sent electric pulses through her neural pathways. Among Veridani, such contact was deeply intimate, reserved for bondmates and family. That Jamal knew this cultural significance was evident in his careful approach, giving her every opportunity to withdraw. Instead, she leaned into his touch, her three-fingered hand rising to rest against his chest where she could feel the strange rhythm of his single heart, so different from her dual-chambered cardiac system, yet somehow perfectly in sync with her own pulse. What happens when your diplomatic assignment ends? She asked, practical concerns momentarily overriding the growing intensity between them. I have 3 more years minimum, he replied. After that, it would be my choice whether to extend or request reassignment. His fingers continued their gentle exploration of her face. But those decisions don't have to be made alone. The implication hung between them, beautiful and terrifying in its potential. Their moment of connection shattered at the sound of the outpost's security alert. On the monitor beside them, they could see a group of official vehicles approaching, not the single inspector from before but a full enforcement squad. They've overridden my diplomatic codes, Jamal said, checking the security system. This isn't about residency permits anymore. Illista's body tensed, instinctively moving toward the room where Tavi slept. What do they want? You, came a voice from the communication system. Illista of Colony AR-17, you have been identified as a person of interest in ongoing security investigations. Your former position granted you access to agricultural defense systems. The consortium is offering significant bounty for former biodefense specialists. Jamal's expression hardened. They're here to detain you for questioning, or worse, to trade you to the consortium for political favor. I never worked in defense, Illista protested. I developed disease-resistant food crops. Techniques that could be weaponized, Jamal said grimly, understanding dawning. That's why they're really here, not to help you, to use you. The enforcement squad's transport landed outside, its lights bathing the observation deck in harsh blue illumination. We have 3 minutes before they breach diplomatic seals, Jamal said, moving with sudden military precision. He activated a hidden panel in the wall, revealing emergency equipment and a secure communication terminal. I need you to trust me completely right now. Illista felt fear constricting her breathing channels but nodded firmly. I trust you with my life, with Tavi's life. As the enforcement squad approached, Jamal pulled her close, pressing his forehead against hers in the traditional Veridani gesture of absolute trust. Then let me show you what happens when someone threatens my family. The word, family, echoed through Illista like a vow, stronger than any diplomatic protection or official document. In that moment, separated by biology but united in purpose, they made a decision that would change the course of 3 lives forever. Outside, the authorities approached, unaware they were about to clash not with a solitary diplomatic officer, but with something far more formidable, a human protecting those he had come to love. This is Earth Diplomatic Outpost Veridon 7. Jamal's voice rang through the exterior communication system, the formal diplomatic protocols contrasting with the intensity in his eyes. You are attempting to breach a sovereign Earth facility, in violation of Treaty Articles 12 through 17. Illista watched in awe as he transformed before her, no longer just the kind human who had opened his door, but a formidable representative of Earth backed by the weight of interstellar law. On the security monitors, the Veridani enforcement squad hesitated at the threshold. Their commander stepped forward, cranial ridges flaring with authority. We have jurisdiction to investigate security threats, diplomatic liaison Reeves. The refugee harbored within is classified as such. Incorrect, Jamal replied, his fingers flying across the communication console. I've just transmitted Specialist Alista's complete file to your superior, Magistrate Ven, as well as to Earth Central Command. Her work was exclusively in food sustainability. Any claims to the contrary would constitute illegal detention of a protected diplomatic consultant. He turned to Alista, mooting the exterior communication. I'm gambling that they don't actually have authorization from the highest levels. Mid-level security officers often exceed their authority when they think they can impress superiors. Alista nodded, struggling to keep her fear from showing as Tavi emerged from her room, awakened by the commotion. "Mother," the child asked, her secondary limbs wrapping protectively around herself. Jamal knelt to Tavi's level. "Remember the hiding game we practiced? The special room with the stories and games?" When she nodded, he gently guided her toward a concealed panic room. "Time to play for real. I'll come get you when we're done talking to the visitors." After ensuring Tavi was secure, Jamal turned back to the monitor where the enforcement squad remained in heated discussion. A new transmission was coming through, from a higher authority. "Magistrate Ven," Jamal acknowledged as the distinguished Veridani official's image appeared. "Liaison Reeves," the magistrate replied, her ancient face inscrutable. "It seems there has been overzealousness on the part of local enforcement. I've reviewed the file you transmitted." Alista stepped into view of the communication panel, standing tall despite her fear. "Magistrate, I served our colony faithfully. My work was to feed our people, never to harm anyone." The aged Veridani studied her for a long moment. "I remember the AR-17 colony. Your agricultural innovations kept our outer settlements viable. The enforcement squad is withdrawn for now." Her voice hardened. "However, your irregular entry and residence cannot be overlooked." "That responsibility is mine," Jamal interjected. "I've submitted all proper documentation for diplomatic asylum and residence permits. Any procedural violations are diplomatic matters between Earth and Veridan." The magistrate's cranial ridges flexed with what might have been amusement. "Indeed, we will process the applications thoroughly." The communication ended. Outside, the enforcement squad reluctantly returned to their vehicles. The immediate danger had passed, but the encounter had changed everything. Word would spread quickly through Helix Prime. A human diplomat had defied Veridani authorities to protect refugees. "Will we be safe?" Alista asked once they had retrieved Tavi from the panic room, the child now sleeping between them on the common room seating platform. Jamal's finger traced the delicate edge of Tavi's gill slits, which fluttered peacefully in sleep. "Safer than before. Magistrate Ven's involvement makes this political now. Any action against you would require answering uncomfortable questions about why the Veridani government is persecuting a botanical specialist who helped feed their colonies." Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent weather alert. Another ice storm was approaching, the worst of the season according to the forecast. "The Western District will be hit hardest," Alista noted with concern. "Many residences there have minimal emergency systems. They rely on the central grid, which fails during severe storms." Jamal's expression changed as he considered this information, including families with children. "Yes," Alista confirmed. "The wealthy believe infrastructure failures won't affect them. They're rarely prepared for true emergencies." A plan formed between them without needing explicit discussion, a shared understanding that had developed in their weeks together. Within hours, the outpost's emergency protocols were activated. Jamal's diplomatic channels broadcast an offer of shelter to any residents affected by the coming storm. "Do you think anyone will come?" Alista asked as they prepared emergency supplies. "After how they treated us." Jamal smiled. Compassion isn't about keeping score. The storm hit with unprecedented fury, worse than even the severe weather that had driven Alista to the outpost's door weeks earlier. Power fluctuations rippled through Helix Prime as predicted. By nightfall, the first hesitant visitors arrived, a young Veridani couple with an infant, their dwelling's environmental systems failing in the freeze. They stopped short upon seeing Alista. "You," the female said, recognition dawning. "You came to our door during the last storm." Alista recognized them as the 13th residents that had rejected her, the young family who had hurried their children away from the site of refugees. "Yes," she acknowledged simply, offering them warm beverages while Jamal configured the environmental controls for their comfort. More residents arrived as the night progressed, 16 in total, including 3 who had explicitly turned Alista away before. The awkwardness was palpable, shame evident in the flattened cranial ridges of those who recognized her. None addressed it directly until an elderly Veridani, the 12th rejection who had scanned her for disease, finally spoke. "I was wrong," he said, his dignified posture bent with more than age. "Fear made me cruel. I cannot undo that cruelty, but I can acknowledge it." As the night deepened and the storm raged outside, something remarkable happened within the outpost walls. Barriers of species and status dissolved in the face of shared need. Jamal demonstrated human games that Tavi had learned. Alista shared techniques for stretching emergency rations using flavorful Veridani preservation methods. In the early hours of morning, with the storm still howling outside, Alista found Jamal standing alone in the hydroponics lab, monitoring the emergency power reserves. "You knew this would happen," she said, not a question but a realization. "You knew they would need help eventually." "I hoped," he corrected. "When people are forced to see each other as equals in need, it changes perspectives." He turned to face her, exhaustion evident in his features but his eyes bright. "Sometimes the only way to change minds is to first change circumstances." Alista moved closer, emboldened by all they had faced together. "And sometimes," she whispered, her hand rising to trace the strange, fascinating contours of his face, "the heart changes first and everything else follows." The kiss that followed transcended their biological differences, tentative at first, an exploration of unfamiliar territory, then deepening with shared discovery. His lips were softer than Veridani mouths, her skin cooler than human norm, yet they found harmony in these differences rather than discord. When they finally parted, breathless and transformed, the first light of dawn was breaking through the storm clouds. Neither spoke of what had passed between them. No words seemed adequate for this crossing of boundaries no diplomatic protocol had anticipated. In the common room, Veridani children played alongside Tavi, their earlier wariness forgotten. Adults who had closed doors in Alista's face now shared space and stories with her child. The artificial distinction between citizen and refugee had temporarily dissolved in the face of the storm's impartial threat. "Something's changing," Jamal observed, his arm around Alista's waist as they watched the scene. "Yes," she agreed, leaning into his embrace, "but is it enough?" The answer waited with the storm's end, when these temporary guests would return to their lives and comfortable prejudices, or perhaps carry something new back with them. Spring came to Veridon with startling swiftness, the transition from bitter cold to vibrant warmth as dramatic as the changes in Helix Prime since the Great Storm. The outpost, once isolated on the city's edge, had become something unexpected, a nexus of transformation. Alista stood in what had once been a simple hydroponics lab, now expanded into a thriving botanical research center. Veridani and earth plants intertwined in symbiotic patterns that defied conventional agricultural wisdom, mirroring the unlikely connections forming among those who tended them. "The magistrate's office has approved the final permits," Jamal announced, entering with a data tablet. He placed it on a work surface before sliding his arms around her waist from behind, pressing a kiss to the sensitive area where her cranial ridges met her neck. "The community center expansion can begin next week." Alista leaned back against him, savoring the now familiar warmth of his body. "I still can't believe Magistrate Ven donated the adjacent land. She was our fiercest opponent 3 months ago." "Until her grandson was among those sheltered here during the storm," Jamal reminded her. "Nothing changes policy like personal connection." The aftermath of the Great Storm had indeed catalyzed change. Those who had taken shelter at the outpost returned to Helix Prime transformed by their experience, carrying stories of a human and an outer colony refugee who had shown more compassion than their own neighbors. The narrative spread, challenging long-held prejudices. Not all had been immediately convinced. The path to acceptance had been neither straight nor easy. Yet with each passing week, more Veridani citizens had come forward, some offering apologies, others resources, many simply wishing to learn. "Mother, mother!" Tavi's excited voice preceded her as she burst into the lab, her school communication device clutched in her secondary limbs. "I've been selected for the interspecies cultural exchange. I'll get to visit Earth next year." Alista embraced her daughter, marveling at the transformation in the once malnourished child. Tavi now attended the prestigious Academy of Helix Prime, the first refugee child admitted under the new educational inclusion policies that Alista herself had helped draft. "Your project on comparative botany must have impressed them," Jamal said, ruffling the smooth crest that had recently begun forming on Tavi's head, a sign of her approaching maturity. "Administrator Krell says I have a unique perspective," Tavi replied proudly, "being part of two worlds." Two worlds indeed, Alista thought, watching her daughter race off to share her news with the young Veridani who had arrived for the afternoon's community garden project. The same administrator who had once rejected their residence application now championed Tavi's academic career. Later that evening, after the day's visitors had departed and Tavi had finally exhausted her excitement enough to sleep, Alista and Jamal retreated to their private quarters. What had once been a sparse diplomatic dwelling now reflected their blended life. Veridani meditation crystals alongside earth books, ceremonial family tokens intermingled with photos of Jamal's distant relatives. "I received a message from Earth Central today," Jamal said quietly as they settled onto the sleeping platform. "They're impressed with the outpost's evolution into a cultural center. They've offered me a new position, ambassador to Veridon." Alista's dual hearts accelerated. That would mean permanent assignment, he confirmed, his expression serious as he took her hands in his. No more uncertainty about term limits or reassignment, but it would also mean more visibility, more scrutiny of our unconventional family arrangement. Family, the word had taken on new meaning in recent months, as their relationship deepened beyond initial attraction into something profound. Their physical intimacy had required patience and discovery, mapping the differences between human and Veridani anatomy with tender exploration. Those differences, once navigated, had revealed complementary pleasures neither species typically experienced alone. "Are you concerned about official reaction?" she asked, her cranial ridges flushing with emotion. "No," Jamal said firmly. "Earth has recognized interspecies relationships for decades. I'm thinking of you and Tavi. The visibility could make you targets for those who still cling to old prejudices." Alista's lips curved in the smile she had practiced to communicate with humans. "We've faced worse than disapproval." Jamal traced the elegant curve of her cranial ridge. "True, but there's something else we should discuss before I accept." He hesitated, then reached into a drawer beside their sleeping platform. "On Earth, we have traditions for formalizing family bonds." The small box he retrieved contained a ring, a simple band of metal inlaid with luminescent material that matched the exact hue of her cranial ridges. "It contains particles from your homeworld," he explained softly. "I contacted Geological Preservation Services. It's not much, just a few grains from before the devastation. But I thought." Words failed him as Alista took the ring with trembling fingers. Among Veridani, bondmate ceremonies involved an exchange of biological material, blood or tissue that would permanently link their physiologies. Such a bond with a human was biologically impossible, yet Jamal had found a way to honor the spirit of her traditions while offering his own. "In human custom," he continued, finding his voice, "this would be a proposal of marriage, in your terms an offer of permanent bonding." His eyes held hers. "I know we can't have the biological connection your people value, but—" She stopped his words with a kiss, gentle but insistent. "Our connection transcended biology the moment you opened your door during the storm," she whispered against his lips. "Everything since has only confirmed what I think we both knew then. Some bonds form beyond explanation or expectation." The ring slid perfectly onto her central finger, modified to accommodate her anatomy. As it settled into place, the luminescent materials synchronized with her bioelectric field, pulsing subtly with her heartbeats. Their lovemaking that night was unhurried and tender, a celebration of unlikely convergence, of barriers overcome through mutual discovery. The physiological differences between them had long since become sources of fascination rather than obstacles. His singular heart beating against her dual cardiac chambers, her cooler skin warming beneath his touch, his 5 fingers intertwining with her 3 in patterns unique to their union. Morning brought a message from Magistrate Venn requesting their presence at the Central Authority. They arrived to find not a bureaucratic meeting, but a formal ceremony. The unveiling of new refugee processing protocols named, to their surprise, the Reeves-Alista Integration Program. "In recognition of your contributions to Veridani society," the magistrate announced before the assembled officials, "and as acknowledgement of errors in our previous approach toward displacement." As the policy details were read, guaranteed housing, educational access, skills recognition, family reunification, Alista felt tears gathering. Each provision addressed a specific hardship she had endured, transformed now into protection for others. "This wouldn't have happened without you," she whispered to Jamal as they stood before the assembly. "No," he corrected gently. "It wouldn't have happened without us, what we created together." The reception afterward brought another surprise. A small contingent of newly arrived humans, Earth's first substantial diplomatic expansion on Veridan. "Ambassador Reeves," one greeted Jamal formally, using the title he had not yet officially accepted. "Earth Central sent us ahead to prepare for the expanded mission. They were quite insistent that we understand the unique cultural approach you've established here." Jamal's arm slid around Alista's waist, his stance making their relationship unmistakable. "The approach is simple," he replied. "We remember that compassion transcends species and policy follows heart." Several standard months later, as Veridan's twin moons illuminated the expanded outpost, now officially the Earth Veridan Cultural Center, Alista stood on the observation deck where she and Jamal had first acknowledged their growing feelings. Beside her, Tavi practiced Earth languages with a group of human and Veridani children, all preparing for the upcoming exchange program. Jamal joined her, his ambassador's insignia gleaming against his formal attire. "The botanical patents were approved," he said. "Your hybridization techniques are now officially recognized. The royalties will fund refugee education for decades." "From 17 closed doors to this," Alista marveled, gesturing to the thriving community below. Former refugees worked alongside Helix Prime citizens in the expanded gardens. The elderly Veridani who had once scanned her for disease now led a health initiative for displaced children. "One open door was all it took," Jamal reminded her, his fingers intertwining with hers. "The rest followed." As his lips met hers beneath the alien sky, Alista reflected on the journey from desperate refugee to respected scientist and advocate, from solitary survival to found family, from rejection to belonging. The storm that had nearly claimed her life had instead delivered her to an unexpected shelter, not merely the physical outpost, but the sanctuary of unconditional acceptance. In crossing the threshold of that human dwelling, she had unknowingly stepped into a new world where differences became strengths and compassion bridged the vast distances between stars. Behind them, the outpost door remained symbolically open, a reminder that shelter, like love, was not meant to be hoarded but shared, especially with those caught in storms not of their making.